and I've met up with somebody from the pharmaceutical industry, and we're just going to have a chat here and record this, and then we're going to put it up online. So I'm not going to ask his name. He wants to remain anonymous, and I'm not going to say which pharmaceutical company he's from, but he is a medical director with a pharmaceutical company. So could you tell us a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry and the conflicts with Scientology Narconon?
I think the major conflicts have been through Narconon and their refusal to treat people with the appropriate medication. The pharmaceutical industry is, of course, a for-profit industry, and there's a sort of a split between the business side and the medical side. But people MDs who go to work for a pharmaceutical company don't suddenly discard their Hippocratic Oath. They're concerned for patients. We develop drugs because we hope that they're going to be an improvement over drugs that are currently used, and that people are going to have a chance to take them appropriately. That's, when people like Narconon and with the Scientology protests, the psychiatry conferences, and the sort of nonsense they're spitting out, sort of all drugs, the vaccines, I think, are especially troubling to us as they're getting on that anti-vaccine bandwagon. That's the sort of thing that is troubling to us. The thing is that Scientology is now so small. The conflicts that with psychiatry in the past, I think, were sort of peaked out in the 90s. That most of the pharmaceutical industry just isn't paying that much attention to it, and those that do, it's sort of like me, on a one-off basis. We see something, we get irritated by it, and we sort of take action on an individual or ad hoc level, and then forget about it again.
Right. Wow. And how is Scientology affecting your industry now compared to the past?
I think it had a lot more voice in the past. I think that the troubles with Narconon recently have really weakened their position. They're one more voice, though, in this, all drugs are bad. Drugs may or may not be appropriate for a given medical condition in a given person. The industry is always accused of having a for-profit motive, and I'm not going to dispute that we have a profit motive there. But that there are the reason that people buy and that doctors prescribe and that the FDA approves drugs is because there's an appropriate place for them. Now, that's an open question for any individual patient, but it should be a question between the patient, maybe their caregiver, maybe not, and the physician that they're talking to, somebody who really knows what's going on, not somebody with no training who's out there telling them that they shouldn't be taking their drugs when, it's something for epilepsy or something for bipolar or something for schizophrenia, something that they really need to function. Whether it's on patent or a generic drug, it doesn't matter. Narconon's opposed to it, and that's hurting patients.
Right. And what's your opinion on the situation where the patients at Narconon Trois-Rivieres in Quebec, their medications were withheld, and not only did I speak out, but when the health ministry shut them down because patients were being taken to the hospital, that 4 more staff members spoke out and said we were admitting patients that we shouldn't have been admitting, taking their drugs away from them, and they were getting in mental trouble. This also happened at other Narconons. So can you comment on the when addicts go into a treatment center and the underlying illness is that they're not being treated, and in reverse they're actually taking medications away from them?
There's a couple of things going on. One of the major reasons people become addicts is because they're self-medicating a condition they shouldn't be. They have issues with any drug, but there's certain drugs that are going to help with that condition and alleviate the need for self-medication. So they ought to be on those. So an automatic stance, taking drugs away from people, saying you can't have anything, when they may or may not be appropriate. I mean, I know that psychiatrists and that other MDs agonize over whether they should give drugs for someone who's got a past history of abuse, whether a particular drug should be administered, and they're very careful about watching over them. They should be watched over by a medical professional who knows about that condition. Whether or not they're going to prescribe a drug or prescribe something else, that medical professional is the person who should be making those decisions, not a treatment group who doesn't have any background and certainly has some very, at the very least, some questionable ideas of science and how the human body works.
Okay, and you're probably, or are you referring to the physicians that Narconon hires to look after their patients, and the medical managers being Scientologists, like we had in Three Rivers, where the medical manager was a Scientologist. The medical doctors and medical managers at Narconon Arrowhead is a Scientologist. This is where we have the conflict and the potential harm.
I'm a big fan of the science-based medicine. And they talk there, they're scientists as well as MDs. They talk a lot about how an MD is not a science degree. Okay, to get an MD, you do a lot of memorizing, but you don't do a lot of thinking about how we acquire knowledge, how we evaluate knowledge, and even the average MD doesn't know a whole lot about how to conduct a clinical trial or even how to evaluate one. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't surprise me that Scientology can find a few MDs out there who are a little bit off the beaten path and are willing to do that. But bluntly, I don't understand how you can be a scientist or a medical professional and be a Scientologist. The beliefs are incompatible.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that for sure, because I've experienced it firsthand. Now, you're the medical director of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, so you know a lot of what's going on. What do you think the future is for Scientology opposing the pharmaceutical industry?
I think that Narconon is probably one of their major routes into the cult. Now that so many others have been shut down, now that so much information is available on the internet, they're going to be desperate to keep that avenue open because they don't have a whole lot of others for routing bodies into the cult.
Right.
So I think they're going to get a little bit strident about defending themselves and defending that program. But I think that the things that have happened in Montreal and Oklahoma and the other places that have sort of exposed Narconon, I feel like I see a bunch of small centers opening up quickly. I think they're trying to get a foothold before that gets shut off, before states start cutting off aid. I think you're going to see a burst of activity here. But over the long term, Scientology seems to be unraveling, so I think there'll be a spike in activity that will gradually fall away as the cult disintegrates.
Right. Are you familiar with CCHR? Citizens Commission on Human Rights? Those are the ones that oppose psychiatry, and they have actually even a place where you walk in and you see how the psychs have really messed people's minds up with electroshock and whatnot.
I have.
But that's just another arm of Scientology.
It is. And you know what? A lot of it is, it's a straw man argument. In psychiatry is not my major area of specialty, although I've dabbled in it.
Yours is a science and medical part.
Right. Yeah. And I've dabbled in development of psychiatric drugs. The issue there is the straw man is that they're taking things that were maybe a little bit wacky even for that time, but they're taking stuff from 50 or 100 years ago and saying this is what we're doing, this is what they're doing now. And they're not. They're not. Medicine has evolved. I mean, that's one of the things that strikes me about Scientology is because they stick to their leaders' dictates and they don't evolve, their thinking doesn't move, and they're not allowed to develop and new information and new knowledge. And that's exactly how science works. So they're stuck protesting something that may have been true, may or may not have been true 50 years ago, probably was true 100 years ago. But nobody now takes Freud seriously. Nobody, except in certain special cases, no one does electroshock therapy, and they're protesting stuff that just isn't part of mainstream medicine anymore. Yeah, and they're making you think that it still is. And for people who aren't familiar with the subject, they think it is. And that's what's discouraging to me, because it discourages people from getting appropriate treatment. Right, and that's true, because Scientology can't change. The executives couldn't change it even if they wanted to, because it's L. Ron Hubbard tech, and to change it is a high crime. So they have to pull stuff from the 50s and 60s up in today's date, and it's ludicrous. Yeah. Even their terminology is stuff from those days. So ridiculous. When someone, someone who's trained medically starts hearing some of the stuff they're saying, we kind of laugh at it and dismiss it. I think, that's going to slow down their final disintegration, because people, as they get smaller, people aren't taking them seriously, and there's still that small group of people who are still trapped in it. And those are the people I feel for, because no one's paying attention to them, and someone should. Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, thank you very much. I appreciate this so much. Sure. It's fantastic.